like an existent phenomena, its emptiness of an essence or entity, its own inherent, independent entity or essence. Signlessness in this context, there are different meanings, but I'll give the most profound, the most often also explained. Signlessness refers to the meditation on in a sense, the emptiness of causes. In other words, so that even the causes of things are empty of inherent existence. And then wishlessness would be meditating on the emptiness of the results of things. Does that make sense? So it's in this concept, of course, emptiness doesn't mean it's non-existent, right? But emptiness means it's empty of an independent essence. And you can see how, like, so somebody who meditates on wishlessness doesn't grasp in the same way, right, at results of things, because they understand that because results arise due to causes, they're empty of independent, right? But the fact that results arise due to causes proves they're dependent on the causes. So that's one way of saying they're empty of their own inherent essence, or independent nature, or something like that. So anyway, there are different levels of explaining that, but in brief, that's that. So emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness means the Bodhisattva cultivates in meditation those understandings, and that a Buddha naturally and spontaneously has those understandings. Next, of these qualities in common with Bodhisattvas they call them the three paths of emanations. And so one thing that is true of Bodhisattvas, actually, last time I mentioned, like, there's this idea, right, the teaching explains that I went through, like, there are 5 paths and 10 bhumis, grounds, right? So on the path of seeing, right, which is the third path, when the Bodhisattva sees emptiness directly, right, their meditation becomes a non-conceptual, direct realization of emptiness. Sometimes, and I said that, right, sometimes they talk about, like, they describe the experience as like water poured into water. There's no longer a sense of subject and object. There's a complete absorption and realization of emptiness. It's said that after that, bodhisattvas gain the ability to emanate, send out emanations, and they can sort of emanate other bodies to go to activities. And so again, this is trying to, like, lead up to, so they say, like, a first level bodhisattva can emanate up to 100 bodies. One day I asked recently Kensho Rinpoche about this. He said, it's not that they have to send out 100 all the time. He said they can send out up to 100. And then he was like, they can do. He was describing there are different ways they can do that. He was like, they can, through meditation they can do that, or they can sort of do it. They can sort of magically emanate them, or they can take rebirth in different, like, at the same time in different forms, or they can look at a sort of something and emanate it into something else to help others. He was giving different examples. He said, so they have that ability, and then at the second level they can do, like, up to 1,000, and so on. It keeps increasing, which is part of how you start to imagine what's a Buddha then, right? How many, like, that a Buddha can send out infinite emanations. So the idea is, as you get closer and closer to Buddhahood, you're able to sort of be more available to others in this kind of way. And so these are interesting. The 3 paths of emanations, they're talking about, so bodhisattvas who are, so these are high-level bodhisattvas who are on the different bhumis or grounds of bodhisattvas. So I'll read through. So they call it, there are 3 types of emanations here listed that they cultivate. One is emanation that has a viewing forms. That one means this, that the bodhisattva, let's say this, discriminates themselves as having a form in this case. So, like, they're in our realm, for example. They're a bodhisattva who's like for example, they could be in our realm or in a form realm. But they have a body, right? And they can see their body, and then they can emanate out additional bodies. So that's why they call it viewing form. They can see themselves having a form, and then they emanate out more forms. Then there's the second one is called that not having a form, viewing forms. And what that means is that the bodhisattva is in the formless, at this point, is in the formless realm. There are 4 formless realms, which we're going to get into in a minute. So they don't see them. And if you're in the formless realm, you don't see yourself as having a form, because you don't have a form, because that's the nature of the formless realm. So they're in the formless realm, so they don't even see themselves as having a form, and yet they can emanate out forms to benefit others, which is a special ability for high-level bodhisattvas, that they can sort of abide in the formless realm in a kind of formless meditative state while emanating out forms to benefit others.
So formless forms?
No, the forms will have, like, so the emanations will have form, but they're the source, like their initial place they were abiding as the formless realm.
So forms in the formless realm. They emanate forms in the formless realm.
The idea, I think, is like, so imagine this, like imagine that, for example, like, if you imagine that the bodhisattva is in the realm of, is like meditating on the emptiness, meditating on emptiness in the realm of infinite consciousness. That's one of the formless realms. So the bodhisattva can themselves, like, so let's say a bodhisattva enters, like, makes a decision. Now I'm going to meditate on infinite consciousness, on the realm, not just to meditate like in a way we would, but they're actually going to enter into the realm of infinite consciousness in order to meditate on emptiness there. But then they can decide, like, okay, and while I do that, I have students in what town do you live in? Dumfries? No.
Yeah.
Dumfries. Like, so while they're about to, like, let's say, so there's a bodhisattva and he says, okay, I'm going to emanate, I'm going to go into the realm of infinite consciousness, but I have this student Gabe who really needs help in Dumfries. So they can simultaneously sort of,
So in another realm.
yeah, they can be, yeah, so
Different
they can be in
realms.
the formless realm in infinite consciousness, and they can also at the same time be having like somebody come knock to your door to say, Gabe, don't forget you said you were going to like help others in some way. Don't forget that. So that's like, so they would have like one, their, you know, it's like their main meditation is there, but they're also sending out a form somewhere else. And then the third of these three paths of emanations is called the attractive. And what that is the yogi imagines all forms, or visualizes or imagines all forms as attractive and of one taste in being beautiful, in a sense, and therefore completely overcomes the tendency to like attractive and dislike unattractive forms. And that one's important in the sense of imagining what it's like to be a Buddha again, because that's part of why we're meditating on this, right? So what they're saying is that at a certain, like, you know, up to a certain level of where do I say this? Like, we have, actually you can see it's like a very instinctive part of, not just human, I mean animals have it too, right? Sort of, what's the word, like, where we're attracted and disgusted by something, like, you know, we sort of have this aversion and attraction. At a certain level of the path, the bodhisattva cultivates a view that no longer has that. Does that make sense? So they no longer feel, like they no longer discriminate in that way. They find everything attractive, it says, or beautiful in that sense. You know, they describe sometimes in Vajrayana Buddhism, right, where like they'll describe, actually the Dalai Lama sometimes jokes, right, where somebody will say, oh, I'm transforming desire into the path. Somebody will like sort of claim they're a high practitioner, and he'll say, oh, then can you transform poop? You know, and do you want to eat it? And the person will say no, and say, then you're not really at that level. You're just pretending. So if you can transform it where it seems beautiful and tasty to you, then you're, you know, so he teases people sometimes who are pretending to be higher on the path than they are, I think. You know, they'll say, oh, I'm transforming it by, I'm having like champagne or something, you know. So, oh,
Right.
Try it with poop. And, you know, it's the same thing, right? It's like, if you can, it's because the person at this level of the path, everything appears as, in other words, they've transcended attachment and aversion, and they've transcended, you know, what's the word, like, you know, that even that very subtle level, right? Like when you see a certain form, you want to go towards it. When you see another form, you know, even if you're not like saying it, there's a kind of, you can almost feel it in your body. You can actually feel it in your body, right? The sense of like wanting to move forward or wanting to move back from, or sort of even our facial expression, right? We like the subtle smile or a subtle look of disgust. So these bodhisattvas get past that. Does that make sense? They overcome that through their meditation, and reach a point of seeing all forms as beautiful, all appearances as attractive. And that's relevant because then you have to imagine a Buddha, right? So they say that a Buddha experiences everything as blissful. Can you imagine that, actually? So, you know, like if they give a Buddha, they said like if they give the Buddha like terrible tasting food, it tastes delicious to the Buddha, or something like that. That's through the practice, you know, it's through these levels of the practice that the Buddha already went through previously, and so on. Then the next one, then there's what's called the 5 paths of abiding happily in the present life. And I just wanted to mention something about that, then I'll describe what it is. That's interesting, right? Because like a lot of times, what's the word? Like, sometimes people can, like, who are thinking, like, sometimes people have this wrong view, actually a wrong understanding that, like, if you decide you want to be of service to others, right, and practice a life of kindness and service and compassion, that, say right, almost like a martyred idea, that then you should be unhappy, or you should, like, that's difficult and miserable, right? And Buddhist idea is you should be blissed out, actually. Like, the Buddhist idea is completely the opposite. Like, in other words, it's like, the more we're of service to others, the more happy we are. Right? That's the idea. And so the idea that the bodhisattvas this is saying that bodhisattvas are happy, right? And they actually cultivate more and more happiness, right? A kind of cheerful, joyful, blissful approach. Because actually, otherwise, who's going to sustain, right? You're not going to sustain your service to others if you're miserable. Also, if you're miserable, you're not of that much service to others, actually, right? Like, if you're walking around like this all the time, actually you bring other people down. If you're, oh, okay, I got to help you now. The person doesn't enjoy being helped. The idea is that bodhisattvas are more and more filled with joy, actually. Does that make sense? And filled with happiness. And that even the practice itself fills them with happiness. And then there's these practices. These relate to the 4 formless absorptions, and to the last one is another one. But like, in meditative, actually this is an important point. So in meditative practice, like, this is talking about in meditation, like there are, which we'll get to more in the later parts of this text. But so, when we just meditate, we try to focus, right? And actually, if you notice, if you like have a good session of meditation, science has shown this, right? Like, just for ordinary people, I'm talking about. If you if you've meditated for a few months, right? There will come some times where you start to really feel a sense of relaxation, and a sort of happy, like a peaceful feeling, right? And that's why even, like, you don't have to be like a great meditator. Like, mindfulness researchers, right, have done that with people who are like caregivers for someone who's dying, and they teach them to meditate, and they say, oh, I'm starting to feel a little better, it calms me down, right? That's the very beginning point of meditation. So then like, as you continue, the Buddhist teachings say, as you continue on in your meditation practice, you achieve deeper and deeper levels of peacefulness, and of joy, and of, so then there comes a point, I don't want to go into too much detail, but there comes a point where there's a point where a person achieves what is called calm abiding, where they can focus for as long as they want and as deeply as they want on any object. At that point, the person is said to achieve something called bliss and pliancy. Right? Bliss means they have this, like, overwhelming feeling of well-being and pleasure in their body and mind. And pliancy means they can then, they say they feel very light. Like, they can just do anything they want to do. They don't feel like, like for us, after a while, you start to feel like if you do a lot, like if you do some difficult task, or just the end of a work day, and like you feel like heavy, like you want to just lay down on the couch, or heavy, like you just want to go like that. If you achieve calm abiding, your body and mind stay flexible, where you can apply them to what you want to apply them to. After achieving calm abiding, the person, and it goes in sequence of subtlety. So you can't, it's like you go into, there are 4 form realms. And those 4 form realms are like subtle levels of form, where the being is in a deep meditative concentration, where they're no longer perceiving and interacting with gross, the desire realm. So the desire realm by its nature is, has these kind of, what's the word, gross forms, and we naturally are grasping and averse. Like, we naturally have attachment to food, to other people, to stuff, to whatever. So in these 4 form realms, and they say that, actually, it's an interesting point. They say that the meditator at those levels, what happens is if a person achieved calm abiding, and then they look back at the desire, they describe like the bodhisattva looks back at the desire realm and recognizes, wow, that's really not that pleasurable. Like, compared to meditation pleasure, that's not so great. And they sort of renounce that. They say, I want to move to a higher level of pleasure. So they go from that to the lowest level of the form realm. And then they sort of say, wow, there's even through their meditative practice, they start to see, I could even go to a more subtle place, where the sort of, my mind is even more peaceful and more subtle and more joyful than that. So then they go on. Does that make sense? And they keep doing that through these 4 levels of the form realm. I'll share a brief, it's okay if I share a brief side comment related to this. One day I was actually talking to a monk I knew who I'd heard had achieved very high levels of meditative concentration. And I was saying to him, I was talking to him, and I said, I've noticed that a lot of, been around Western monks especially, I noticed a lot of the Western monks, like, they don't stay monks if they travel. If they stay in the monastery, they stay a monk, but when they start traveling around, they often give up their monk vows because it's like, they're in the desire realm and they start wanting a partner or a job or more money or more something, they start wanting something, and then I said, you've been a monk a really long time, why is that? How did you manage it? You travel? And I said, how did you manage to stay a monk? I know it's not easy. And he said something like, if you haven't achieved those levels of meditation and you're in the desire realm, it's really difficult. Because like your body and your mind naturally gravitate towards wanting something or other. And he said, but if you achieve even below, he wasn't even talking about the form realm, he said even if you get close to calm abiding, he was saying the pleasure of that is so much more that you start to feel, well, why in the world would I want, like, it's not like intellectual, it's experiential, where you feel, why in the world would I want that? Like some vacation and a beach vacation or a partner or money or some fancy meal. He's like, this is so much more pleasurable, and it's sustained. It's not like pleasure that lasts for, you go to the restaurant, you have the meal, and then you start to feel sick to your stomach or you get tired. He's like, this pleasure sustains. He's like, so who would want, like, you start to feel naturally like, oh, that's boring. Or something like that. That's not interesting at all. So he was just describing a little bit the sense of, that's related, the pleasure, a happy life, right? In other words, the happy life that comes from meditative experience. That's what this is describing. Does that make sense? So in this case, though, it's even higher than that. So what they're saying is the Bodhisattva goes through the 4 levels of the form realm and then gets to even more subtle states, which are called the 4 levels of the formless realm. And what's unique about bodhisattvas is most beings, when they enter the formless realm, they're said to be the most pleasurable states within samsara, because they have the least suffering. But bodhisattvas don't get attached to them, right? They go there in order to meditate on emptiness there, and use those meditations to meditate, like those subtle levels of mind, to meditate on wisdom, and also to understand how do beings go to these realms so that they can then benefit those kinds of beings as well. Does that make sense? So those 4 realms are, the lowest of them is infinite space. Right? So in infinite space, in other words, it's like the being no longer has a gross body. Their experiences of a kind of, if you imagine like the being is completely meditating on the idea or the experience of infinite space, such that their mind is completely absorbed in that. Does that make sense, kind of? So I'm just trying to give some analogy to what that would be.
Yeah, Dr. Lama, one of the things that I've read is like actually strictly prohibited is not get attached to those feelings. Like,
yeah, they say that, they say like, what's the way to say this? Without bodhicitta, you become attached. Oftentimes those, well actually arhats also can not become attached to them, but ordinary people would just become attached in the same way that people become attached to anything else. Like, if you think, and it's like, what's the way to say it? If you think of ordinary people, like, I don't know, like, I can become attached to a piece of cake. Like, that's much, this is much more pleasurable than that. So it would be easy for ordinary people like us to get to grasp at that.
So this is only bodhisattvas on the path of seeing, correct? The ones that.
Oh, they could meditate on these things? I'm not sure, because sometimes like bodhisattvas on the, I'm not sure about that, because bodhisattvas on the path, for example, some bodhisattvas on the path of preparation have achieved calm abiding at that point. So in theory, maybe, I'm not sure if they could meditate in these realms as well. They might be able to at that point. Certainly bodhisattvas on the bhumis do meditate on these, and it's part of the practice. You can actually read where they go to those realms and meditate on emptiness from that, with that kind of mind. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure if a bodhisattva on the path, say the path of preparation, for example, could, because they do have calm abiding, so in theory they could probably go to these realms. So I'm not sure, actually, if bodhisattvas who have achieved calm abiding but haven't yet seen emptiness.
Right, so that's why I was asking.
Sure. Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I'd have to look that up. I
Okay.
don't remember, or I don't know if I ever learned that, actually. Because I know in the Abhisamayana Alankara, it describes how different arhats, it must be the same, it describes how some different people do, in terms of when they go to different levels of meditative absorption, that different people are different. Some people who are like really like sort of meditative concentration go to those experiences and realms earlier in their practice. Others focus more on emptiness and go to those realms later. So it varies. I think it varies from practitioner to practitioner, but I don't know if there are certain restrictions on when they go to which realm. I'm not sure.
So you don't necessarily have to have seen emptiness directly.
No, because even ordinary beings go to those realms. Like beings can get reborn. So like one thing that, according to Buddhism, which actually Hinduism agrees on, is that if you achieve those concentrations, like let's say you meditate on infinite space, and I'm not talking about you just sit there and think about it, but if you achieve calm abiding and then you enter into the realm of infinite space in this life during your meditation, and you don't have bodhicitta, then what'll happen is you'll grasp at that realm, and at the time of death, due to the good karma of having meditated on it, or the meditation karma of having meditated on it, you'd say, you'll achieve rebirth there, and you'll just have a lifetime in the realm of infinite space. And then that'll die. Then you'll end from that realm and fall back to some other realm.
That's kind of weird though, because at that point, well, not necessarily, but you have not, overcome all the delusions. You have not.
No, they actually say it's a really bad experience. Like, just as an aside, this is not about bodhisattvas, but what they say actually is these realms of form realms and formless realms, right, that are extremely, they point out they're extremely pleasurable states of blissful sort of meditation. But actually what they say is that, so like I was saying, so if somebody let's say you haven't realized bodhicitta, but you just like meditating, right? And you go off and you do retreat, and you sort of meditate deeply, and you achieve these experiences. Then what they say happens is the person actually, and I think there are actually people like this around. Actually, what happens is, so you haven't studied with like a bodhisattva, right? But you just learned how to meditate, and you achieve these experiences. What happens oftentimes is that the person thinks they've achieved enlightenment, because compared to the previous experience, it's so pleasurable and so free from all your sort of gross delusions are suppressed through the power of your meditation. They are not ceased, they're not destroyed by wisdom, they're just sort of temporarily suppressed through the power of your meditation. So what they say is the person sort of thinks, oh, I've achieved enlightenment. And then they take rebirth there, and they sort of have this subtle thought as they're like, oh, I'm enlightened. But the problem is that the analogy they sometimes give is it's like throwing a ball up in the air. By its very nature, it's going to fall back. By the nature of gravity, it's going to fall back down. So what they say actually is that the person thinks they've achieved liberation, they sort of have a lifetime in this, let's say, the realm of infinite space, for example. And then there comes a point where the impetus of the energy that sent them to that realm finishes. And then they realize that they're going to fall back, and compared to that realm, when they see like that they're going to fall back, even whether they're going to become whatever let's say a human or a pig or a hell being or a hungry ghost or whatever, like that. So I say it. Oftentimes that person is completely. If you imagine you thought you were enlightened and then suddenly you see you're going to become a pig, right? Like it's like. They completely freak out. They say like, and then they like feel. Also, they lose, like they become sometimes sort of terrified or enraged or something. Sort of this experience like there's no such thing as enlightenment. Almost like also they can kind of feel nihilistic at that point. Like,
Actually, there's a book. It's a very famous book called Kundalini. Have you heard about Kundalini? So a lot of people in Hindu tradition, they meditate as well, just like Buddhists, right? And there is a sect called Kundalini, which is basically the chakras, tantric system, so maybe you follow it. You open it up and you see this great energy in you, but you don't have the wisdom, like you said, to actually, the bodhicitta, to understand why I'm doing it. And they go through spiral, basically. They're confused, delusional, maddened, or whatever. And the fact being, like, there is a practice like that just for Kundalini, which is like, I'll teach you how to open up your chakras, right? And eventually you open up your heart chakra as well in the process, the sixth one, and it happens that they go cuckoo. And there are a lot of people who end up that way.
Yeah, so in and of themselves, these realms are not, like from a Buddhist point of view, they would say you don't particularly aspire to go to these realms, but that bodhisattvas, when they're practicing, enter them for these purposes, right? One is to understand how to help others in relation to those realms. Another is to be happy in this life, right? They gain a sort of joy to then be able to go benefit others. And another is to use those levels of consciousness to meditate on wisdom itself, because that's one of the practices of Bodhisattva, right? So to continue on through the realms. So the lowest of the four is infinite space. More subtle than infinite space is infinite consciousness. So that would be the next one up. The next one above that is nothingness. And again, remember that, like, what's it say? It's not an actual nothingness, right? Because there's not nothing. I mean, actually nothing, like when you, it's like a subtle conceptual idea of nothingness that this being, is meditating on. So they sort of absorb their mind in a meditation on nothingness, right? But again, that's not an object. That's not something that Buddhists aspire to in a sense. But it does make you happy to do. It makes you happy to be there in a sense. But it's a blissful state. But so it's infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and then the last one is called the peak of cyclic existence. Because what they say is within samsara, cyclic existence means samsara, that within samsara, while you're still in samsara and a samsaric being, the most free you can be from suffering is this peak of cyclic existence. If you don't have wisdom, they're saying. Like, so it's the most pleasurable place to go within samsara. But it's not really a place, it's formless. So it's like an extremely subtle, formless absorption, you could call it. So those are four states that bodhisattvas go into and come out of for the benefit of others. And the force of their bodhicitta causes them not to become attached to those experiences or grasp at those, but instead to use them for the benefit of others. And then the last of these five paths happily abiding this life is called the liberation of cessation. And so that's actually the cessations actually are results of having meditated on emptiness. So that's a different thing. Those are actual results of the successful meditation on emptiness, and they sort of abide in these cessations where they're afflictive. And a cessation, an implication of that is that they're afflictive emotions or negative afflicted states of mind cease. They stop through the power of their wisdom.
Dr. Lauren, would you say that these are the 5 types of emptiness as well?
No, because those other ones, like for example, infinite space is not empty. It's not an emptiness. It's a realm. It's a realm it's one of the formless realms. So it's not a type of emptiness in that sense. It's a realm of samsara actually. So the same, it's just like the desire realm. The human realm is the realm of samsara. Infinite space is a samsaric realm. And so the point is that bodhisattvas, one implication of this is bodhisattvas go everywhere within samsara. That's one of the implications here. That the bodhisattvas and their practice travel through all the parts of all the different realms of samsara in order to understand them and to meditate there and practice there. In a sense, even the formless realms they go to. Then I won't go through this part very in much detail, but they go through. They call it. There's next part. I'll go through these very briefly. The 9 supra mundane paths. That means that just what I already talked about. So this is just saying that as the person's practicing, they specifically go to the 4 form realms, the 4 formless realms, and the absorption of cessation. And in each of those, they make it into a supramundane path by meditating on emptiness, by seeing emptiness directly in those realms. Oh, this is a supplement, so it's not on a particular. It's a supplement to page 68. Yes, I'm just going into detail from page 68. Then I'm just going briefly here. I'm just describing qualities of the Buddha's mind in more detail. They also do what's called the 4 paths of abandonment, which means that they achieve what's the word? I said this last time. There's a level where they achieve like a patience or an ability to tolerate the understanding of the 4 noble truths. So it means that they fully understand the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path to the cessation. And the last of these is that they fully practice. They call it the 10 paths of the Buddhas, but it's the 10 perfections. So, sometimes there's listed 6 perfections, sometimes there's listed 10 perfections. And so here it lists 10. So it means that they complete the practice of the 10 perfections in order to become a Buddha. And so bodhisattvas do that.
Is that the ten virtuous actions we're talking
Oh
about?
no, so I'll go through the 10. So the 10 perfections. Actually, I'll describe this too from the point of view of a bodhisattva's practice. Again, I'm just sharing information here, but I mentioned there are 10 bhumis or grounds, right, that a bodhisattva progresses through. So Chandrakirti in his Madhyamaka Avatara, his supplement to the middle way or entry to the middle way, he describes how a bodhisattva, as they progress through those 10 bhumis or grounds, on each ground they sort of perfect one of the perfections. So it's the 6 perfections plus the supplement of 4. So the first 6 would be giving. So this is the 10. Generosity. I guess better to say generosity. So generosity, ethics, patience,
Concentration.
joyful effort, then meditative concentration, then wisdom. That's the 6 perfections. And then the last 4 are power. Skillful means. These last 4 are sort of they call them sometimes subcategories of the perfection of wisdom. But skillful means, power, prayer, and exalted wisdom. So the bodhisattvas travel through those. So one is all bodhisattvas practice all of those, especially the 6 perfections. Bodhisattvas on every level practice those. But it's said that on the first bhumi, I'm going to call it a bhumi, first ground. So the first bhumi, the bodhisattva completes, in a sense, or perfects generosity. So at the end of by the time the bodhisattva has traversed the first ground, or bhumi, they are happy to give away everything. Right? They achieve a kind of state where they no longer grasp at anything. They're just joyful to give endlessly. By the end of the second ground, they've completed the perfection of ethics, in the sense that they no longer even have the impulse to do any negative actions. By the end of the third ground, they've completed the perfection of patience, where no matter what happens to them, they don't, they remain patient, and so on. And it keeps going through those. And by the end of the 6th ground, they've completed the perfection of wisdom, and it keeps going. Does that make sense? So what this is saying is that the bodhisattvas practice those 6 or 10 perfections, and the Buddhas have naturally, spontaneously and effortlessly manifest, those qualities. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? So again, I'm sort of going briefly now, but okay. So those are some qualities that a Buddha has that are in common with the bodhisattva. Does that make sense? So now I'll do just the last thing, in this whole supplement, the last part of the supplement. And that's, I'm going to give a few examples of, these are called unshared or unique qualities of a Buddha. So qualities that a Buddha has that that nobody else has, no other kind of being has. And again, it's just sharing to understand a little bit the qualities of a Buddha. I don't know how much detail to go in. Should I do these briefly, or do you want more detail? It's up to you guys.
Give us an example.
Briefly, okay. I'll give one. I'll give a few examples. So one is called the 4 perfect understandings. In brief, that one is about teaching. So it's saying what it's saying is that a Buddha has a perfect. There is 4 of them, but one is they know that they understand what all afflicted and pure phenomena are, and what their names are, what their enumerations are. So in order to be a skillful teacher, right? In other words, they know all the afflictions that beings have. They know the names of those afflictions. They know how to explain the afflictions. They know how to explain how to have antidotes to those afflictions, so they can explain the perfect skill of a teacher. In other words, they understand the meanings of all words. They understand the definitions of all words. They understand. They have the confidence in understanding the relationships between things. I'm just giving brief. So that way they can teach flawlessly to others in different languages. I wanted to mention the 4 fearlessnesses, because that's mentioned in the text. Lama Tsongkhapa says a Buddha is fearless. And I'll do it briefly. So one is a Buddha is completely fearless in completely knowing that their own contamination, mental afflictions, contaminations are completely destroyed or exhausted. A Buddha has also has perfect realization, perfect confidence that they directly know all phenomena. Right? So Buddha's omniscient. They're saying. Not omnipotent. Buddha can't control everything. But a Buddha, anything that's knowable, a Buddha knows, is what they're saying. And the Buddha's confident. They know that. And so you could almost call it 4 confidences. Another one is, in terms of others' welfare, the Buddhas know what the obstacles are. Right? So that you could say, the way they say here is obstacles to their liberation and the obstructions to omniscience. So they know exactly what all beings' obstacles are to enlightenment, so that they can teach others. They have confidence in knowing that. And the last is they have the realization of the 4 Noble Truths and so on that are the path. So in other words, they fully know all the paths, right? Because as a bodhisattva, they went through all those paths over and over. Now, as a Buddha, they know all the paths to help others, and so they can teach well. Then there are the 10 powers. And that's, so maybe I won't go into all this in detail, but one of those is, I'll just give an example of the first. This one's called the power of knowing the sources and the non-sources. So a Buddha knows the negative karmas that lead to suffering and the positive karmas, that lead to happiness. They know what the causes are for beings' happiness or unhappiness. Another example, I'll give it one more, and I'll stop with the 10 powers here. But another one is they know the karma of beings, right? That's actually said in the sutras. There are stories in the sutras sometimes where the sutras are the teachings of the Buddha, right? So there are stories in the sutras sometimes where some being will have some particular problem, and sometimes the arhats can see a certain amount of the karma, but then they can't see all the details. But it's said that the Buddha can see all the details of karma, what leads beings to happiness and unhappiness. So there are 10 different powers like that. I won't go into detail because I think it's getting too much probably. But then the last is then there are there's a list of 18 unshared or unique qualities, and another 18 qualities that are unique to a Buddha. Sometime maybe we'll cover that if we do the Uttara Tantra class or something.
So there's 10, and then there's 18?
There's 18 more after that, yeah. So there are many different qualities. There are different lists of qualities.
That are unique.
That are unique to a
This is
Buddha.
the unique.
Unique, that only a Buddha has. What? Oh yeah, so one example, actually, I thought this one's example. It's interesting. One example they give, there are a number of examples of those. One is, actually, we'll give this one. We'll give one, one is they never do physically, here, it's interesting, what they say here, never being mistaken physically is the way they list it. But what they're getting at is this, is they actually give examples of this one, where they say, even arhats, right, who have achieved their own liberation, just out of if you imagine this, so an arhat has realized emptiness and has gotten rid of their suffering, so they don't have mental afflictions, they don't suffer. But because of having been in samsara since beginningless time, they have old imprints, old imprints. So physically, even an arhat will have certain, what's there to say this? For example, if something suddenly happens, they'll still get startled out of old habit or something like that. Or they might still sort of make a gesture or do some thing
So we're talking about predisposition.
Yeah, out of their previous predispositions of habit from samsara, in certain circumstances they'll sort of they'll either get startled or they may sort of do a physical gesture that's sort of out of an old habit from their samsaric existence. Whereas a Buddha, no matter what happens, only manifests physical gestures to benefit others. They're not capable anymore they don't any longer have the imprints to do things out of their old samsaric imprints, in a sense, because they don't have any. They've purified all their samsaric imprints. So even their physical manifestation, every gesture, every facial expression, every movement of their body is an expression of enlightened compassion. Whereas even arhats or bodhisattvas can still, almost like their body still has instinctual patterns, you could say, of samsaric reactivity. Is that? Yeah.
I read somewhere where it said they no longer make exclamations. Is that what that's referring to?
That's the next one. So also, the first one was physical, the next one's verbal. So that's another unique quality of a Buddha, is that they don't, yeah, and again, that every sound they make is motivated by compassion to benefit beings, and is a sort of skillful, almost like poetic expression, or whatever, some kind of skillful teaching. Whereas they would say, like, let's just say it, even bodhisattvas, they're implying here that even arhats and bodhisattvas, let's just say it, will sometimes have uncontrolled speech, or will sometimes sort of say something out of habit, or will, if you say something that was like, still something else will come out of their mouth. Whereas the Buddha, they no longer say anything if it's not to benefit sentient beings, and if it's not the most skillful way to benefit sentient beings, because they don't any longer have imprints based on their samsaric patterns. That's my own language to describe it. So yeah, the first one was physical. The second one is it says no longer being having verbally uncontrolled speech. That would be that one.
Right, okay.
So that's the second of these.
So those are unique to Buddha, right?
Yeah, they're saying even high bodhisattvas still have some samsaric
So even
patterns left.
even bodhisattvas in the ninth bhumi.
Yeah, they no longer, a bodhisattva in the ninth bhumi no longer suffers, like an arhat. They're free from all afflictive emotions, so they don't have negative states. Like a ninth bhumi bodhisattva no longer has desire or hatred or grasping, like they no longer do any of those things, but they could still, that's why Lama Zopa said, they can still make mistakes in helping others. That's what they don't have. They're like a Buddha has purified every samsaric habitual pattern, but the ninth bhumi bodhisattva could still, like, it's like if somebody were like suddenly, shove them, they wouldn't suffer, but they might go, huh, like that or something, or they might be like, like that, or something, whereas the Buddha doesn't have those. It's almost like their Buddha's body is different. They no longer have the ordinary instincts of a person, actually, of an ordinary person. In other words, they don't, like the reflexes that we have, right? A ninth bhumi bodhisattva could still have those reflexes. A Buddha doesn't have.
So you're kind of saying that's because of the sort of like the karmic propensity or something still there?
Yeah, because what they say is that like a third bhumi bodhisattva still has afflictive emotions, but after the eighth bhumi, they no longer have afflictive emotions, but they still have imprint. They sometimes say they still have the imprints of those, and they give an analogy. The difference between a negative karma and an imprint is they say it's the difference between, like, if you have garlic in a bowl, that's like having, the metaphor here is that's like having negative karma. Say once you've gotten all the garlic out of the bowl, there's no garlic left, but the bowl still smells like garlic. And they say, so that's like the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumi bodhisattva no longer has any garlic in their bowl, no longer has negative karma, but they still have the imprint, or the smell of it, the leftover imprint, they call it. And that by a Buddhahood, it's like, there's no longer the slightest scent.
Actually, Dr. Lauren, so a few years back in 2004, I think in Wisconsin, they did an fMRI on Mingo Rinpoche. And so the experiment was to put him under fMRI for 8 hours and then get the worst of the instinctual reaction to come up, like say you have a snake in there or you have something along those lines, and capture his reaction on the machine while he was in a meditative state. And they couldn't see nothing whatsoever. It's a different story. He decided to elope, so since 2012 we don't know where he is.
Who is this?
Mingo Rinpoche.
Oh, he's back now.
He's back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, he's back. He came back a few months ago. But yeah, and so the rest are like another one is that the Buddhas don't have memory lapses. They don't forget. They give many examples, even when they're old. They never, they're always joyful and enthusiastic to benefit others. They never get tired out of helping others, and so on. There's a whole list. And the last one I'll say is that the last of these 18 is that they know all, the omniscience, they list 3. They say they know all past objects of knowledge, all present objects of knowledge, and all future objects of knowledge. So they're omniscient in that sense. And omniscient is interesting, right? Omniscient means they know all existent phenomena. But remember, a Buddha is not omnipotent. They can't control other people. They can't, and that's an important point, right? The Buddha is a teacher. So the Buddha can teach. The Buddha can know how to teach, but it's up to you if you want to learn, right? The Buddha can't force you to do anything. The Buddha can know can know your karma, can know your tendencies, can know, but the Buddha can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. That's not the way, like in other words, so the Buddha in that sense is the most skillful of teachers, because the Buddha has all these qualities. Okay, so we'll go back now to the actual Lama text. That was like an excursion. But if you people want to study those more, the text that in the basic program, there are texts for those. One is the Uttara Tantra is one, and then the 4th chapter of the Abhisamaya Alamkara. Those are the 2 places if we want to study more of those, and study those texts. But okay, going back, so we were up to actually all that was we were on page 68 at the positive qualities of knowledge, right? And so there it talks about how the Buddha is omniscient, the Buddha knows all phenomena, and so on. Right. So here in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, he's saying he really focuses in terms of the Buddha's mind on those 3, right? So the first is the Buddha's knowledge, right? So that the Buddha knows emptiness, understands the ultimate nature of phenomena, and also knows all conventional phenomena. The second area that the Lama Tsongkhapa gets into, so we'll move on now to the next section, the next step, in terms of the Buddha's mind, which again was covered in those, but is the Buddha's, here it says positive qualities of mercy or of compassion. Right? And so what it's saying there is that, it's kind of, we just talked about it a bit, but that the Buddha spontaneously and naturally is filled with compassion for all beings. Right? That's the nature of Buddha, is that they're completely filled with compassion. And that they continue, that compassion is unceasing. It's continuous, it's limitless, it embraces all beings. And they even use a phrase, they say bound by compassion. He uses it twice. Once he says compassion without control, and the second he says bound by compassion. And that's an interesting term, because what that means in a way is that, if you think of what we were talking about earlier, that for like eons, right, the Buddha made these vows and meditations and commitments of compassion. And so the idea is that by the time they're a Buddha, it's no longer, like for us, sometimes we have to make some effort to develop compassion, especially if somebody's harming us, right? If somebody does something we don't like, it takes a lot of effort sometimes to say, I should, or sometimes we just say, I should be compassionate for them. No, we're not really. Then if we try hard, we might develop some compassion for the person. What they're saying is the Buddha, after eons of doing that their compassion is their very nature. In other words, like sometimes, like when bound by compassion, like for a samsaric being, like, if you, I'll give an analogy from it. Like if you go up and like whack a rattlesnake on the head, right? The rattlesnake can't help it, it's going to bite you, right? Like in other words, even if the rattlesnake didn't have the intention beforehand, it's the nature of a rattlesnake to bite if somebody's attacking it, right? Or somebody's like disturbing it or something. That the Buddha's instincts, the Buddha's whole nature, the Buddha's whole being is filled with compassion continually. And so in that sense, the Buddha can't help but want to help others. Does that make sense? Like through the Buddha's previous practice, the Buddha has become a being who is completely, its very nature is compassion, right? And so in that sense, it's bound by compassion. So if somebody comes to a Buddha suffering, without choice, the Buddha helps them, in a sense. Even without concepts, the Buddha helps them. It's like a natural expression of who the Buddha is. They sometimes give analogies like the sun, shines light on all beings naturally. It's the nature of the sun to radiate warmth and light or something like that. So that's the point there, is that what Lama Tsongkhapa is pointing out there is that the very nature of a Buddha is love and compassion, great compassion for all beings, and that includes you, is the point. I just want to pause there. Like, can you imagine that? Like, is it hard or easy? So, I'm just asking, like, because because we'd be meditating on this, right? That's the idea here. So in this point, right, you would actually you would meditate, like thinking, okay, so like, the Buddha or all the Buddhas have infinite love and compassion for you, right? That's part of this meditation, right? And I just want to ask you, like, is that easy or hard? Some people have a hard time with that. Like some people feel like, I know some people feel like they're not worthy, or like, oh no, like I can't be whatever. I don't know, almost like, some people like feel like it's hard to take in. So the idea here, actually, if you were to meditate, you would actually imagine the Buddha. You can imagine, if you want to, right? Like the Buddha looking at you with eyes of love and compassion, right? and the Buddha sort of like watching over you, right? And wanting to help you, and like looking for the opportunity where you're open, right, to step in and try to like guide you to enlightenment and happiness, right? Can you? I don't. Is that easy or hard to imagine? Like that's the idea here, right? It's not some abstract thing, right? And we were saying that, but I mean, we're saying it in a kind of theoretical way, but that's the idea, right? Is you're thinking, okay, so the Buddha or all the Buddhas are so I mean, omniscient, right? Means they know you, right? They know what's good about you. They know your flaws. They know your imperfections. They know your worst moments, right? And they love you anyway. They have compassion for you anyway.
That sounds like God, Christian idea of God.
Yeah, it's a little similar, isn't it?
It's personalized love.
Yeah. Yeah, that part I think is similar. How much difference is we don't say
That
Buddha
is God,
created.
right? In any religion.
Omniscience.
So you don't have any more obscurations. That would be the cause for the omniscience. There has to be a cause for omniscience too.
Oh yeah, the Buddha's omniscient. Yeah, I mean the Buddha has to remove all the obstacles to omniscience on the eighth. That's what they do on the top 8th, 9th, and 10th Buddhas. Yeah. But yeah, so I was just pointing out like that part of the practice here would be, because remember I said earlier like the goal of refuge is to feel like Khenpo said, like a child towards their parent, right, towards a good parent. So that means the implication of that is that, as you were saying, that you have to feel some sense of a relationship. It's a relationship, right? Refuge is a relational practice. And I think sometimes we can get a little bit like either, what's the word? We can make the mistake of thinking it's just saying words, like I go for refuge, Enlightenment, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or we can sort of think of it as like a ritual or as something like that. And part of what this is saying is like, it's also, what Khenpo was saying when he says it's like a parent, right, is it's a relationship. You're having a relationship to the Buddha. And the more, and part of the implication is if you think of who a Buddha is, right, according to what we've just been studying, the more you have a relationship to that kind of being, the better for you. That's the point, Like in other words, because like if we have relationships with people who are negative, then they help us become more negative, right? You know that. Like in other words, if you hang out with people who are, like what's the word, very angry about something, right, and you spend a lot of time with them, then your mind gets more and more agitated, right? You might get more and more angry. I mean, you might get angry at what they're angry at, or you might get angry at them, but your mind gets more agitated. So part of this is we're trying to develop a relationship to the Buddhas. Does that make sense? Don't laugh. I remember there's one text where it says, it talks about like the reasons that beings do negative things, like do bad karma, I guess there are many lists, like, our own afflictive emotions, and our, pride or arrogance. And this is one is, relating too much with people who haven't seen emptiness directly. If you do that too much, you may end up having bad habits. So we want to develop relationships with Buddhas is the ideal. Okay, so that's done. The Buddha's compassion, though, is particularly important, I think. I'm just pausing there. I mean, I really think, because also, if we don't relate to the Buddha's compassion, it's hard for us to develop compassion. Like part of how we can develop compassion is by the inspiration of the Buddha's example, right? So again, that's an important point. Okay. Last one of this list is the positive qualities of the Buddha's exalted activities. And one important point there is, as I was already mentioning this, is that they say that a Buddha's activities are, he says here, Lama Tsongkhapa says, spontaneous and uninterrupted exalted activities. Right, so that's where they give this analogy like the sun. Yes.
What does exalted mean, like really in a real sense, not a dictionary meaning? It comes up so often all the time.
Yeah, exalted. It's interesting. Like
something with effort.
No, here it's effortless. So exalted means high usually. Like ordinarily exalted would mean like, so sometimes people might use the word exalted for like a high person, in ordinary language, right? We might say like king, something, the exalted meaning.
Highest of activity.
The high, yeah. So in this sense, though, it's like, whereas because it's similar to noble. In one sense, I think it's this. The Buddhist idea, right? I guess to me, actually, it's quite an important. I like this point. I think it's interesting. Is that one thing that the Buddha himself did? If you read the Buddha's own words, is he really turned a certain thing on its head. Like in worldly society, you know, like actually, you know, in ancient India it would have been kings or Brahmins, or something, but like in modern American society, right? Like, you know, like, let's say this, like, I don't know how to say it right. If like a music or a movie star does something, people are like, oh wow, like that, you know, like I don't know who's like Brad Pitt, or I don't know who's now, like, but like I don't know who that is, like Beyonce maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure. But oh wait, no, who's that? I forget. But you know, so like if a person does it, we're like, oh wow, like I saw, what was it like in the Super? Who danced in the Super Bowl?
Beyonce,
was it?
yeah.
And who else? Like was there somebody else too?
Lady Gaga?
Lady Gaga or something.
No,
I was
she-
thinking of Lady Gaga.
She sung the national anthem.
Yeah, so
Right.
like where people were like, oh, what was she wearing?
Yeah.
You know, like some of that.
Yeah.
Oh, what did she? Like it's like people consider that like what's important. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
or like who is the newest movie star dating? Like that's important.
Yeah.
And so like, and what the Buddha did, you know, that's I think our cultural equivalent, right? Where it's like what's interesting and important about a person, or sometimes billionaires. It's like, oh, that's important. Like, you know, what do they do? You know, like, so one thing the Buddha did, if you read his like or politics, yeah. If you look at what the Buddha did in ancient India, which is very still Buddhist, is like what the Buddha said was actually those things are not important at all. Right? What's important is what's exalted, what's important, what's high, are activities to benefit others. Is compassion, is wisdom, is love, is service. You know, and particularly is wisdom, right? And so it's just reversing in a way. So it's saying, so in a way it's saying exalted activities. In a way, to me, it's like part of why I like that idea. Maybe exalted isn't a word we use that often, but what it's trying to do is turn on its head the ordinary idea of, like, in other words, what's interesting, what's important, what's of significance. Oftentimes we feel what's of significance. And part of it is like what we feel is. Rinpoche used to say this actually, like say what ordinary people think is important is meaningless. You know, and then he said what a Buddhist practitioner thinks is important, ordinary people will think is meaningless. You know, like how compassionate were you today? You know, how much love did you feel in your heart today? Like an ordinary person would be like, I don't really care. Like, you know, like I don't care how much love you had in your heart. But, you know, that's not like if you wrote your what's the word? If the New York Times reported on that, right? Like people would think, what are you talking about? Or something like, or if they did a commercial. You know, today Mike had a particularly. Can you imagine that on the weather? Like instead of a weather report, today Mike had a particularly loving morning, but he got distracted in the afternoon. He was trying to work on his plane. He kind of got caught up in the mechanics of it, and he wasn't thinking about love for a few hours. But then in the evening, it came back very strongly again. You know, like, that'd be the news report. And they say, and if somebody said, "Oh yeah, but like, you know, a politician made a speech. Who cares? That's not important. What's important is Mike was compassionate for like 4 hours straight." You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, so to me, exalted is that actually it's getting at a very deep point, which is like what's exalted, and this is saying exalted is what's of benefit to others, what's of service, what's compassionate, a wise and compassionate activity in a way, and that's what exalted. Everything else is what's the word, like nonsense.
The closest would be, Dr. Lauren probably would be compassionately enacted activities or along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point, though, isn't it? It's very true of our like.
It's
culture.
all over the places, like, you know.
Every culture has some, like, yeah. So the Buddha, whatever culture the Buddha would be in, the Buddha would be saying, that's not what's important. Right? What's important, you know, and that's why I like the word Arya, right? Even the word Arya, which means in the Buddha has a unique meaning of that word, right? Arya in the Buddha's terminology. So because in ancient India, right, an Arya meant somebody of a high caste, right? And basically the Buddha said, that's not Arya. That's not noble. Right? The Arya was translated noble. Buddha said, that's not noble at all, actually. A noble means you've seen the truth. If you haven't seen the truth, you're not noble. Which actually, like somebody who was a high caste could have considered that quite an insult. You know, imagine going up to a billionaire and saying, you're poor. A rich person has contentment in their heart and wisdom in their heart. You're a beggar. Right? You might feel quite unhappy. He said that.
Actually, same can be said right now about all these rich people, right? They think they're right, and they think they are noble in some sense. In olden times in India, it was about being a Brahmin, which was the highest caste where you could actually, indulge yourself in reading and wisdom and stuff. Otherwise, you're not even allowed to do anything if you have the lower caste.
I think I really.
It's the same phenomenon, pretty much.
I remember
Right now.
similar. I remember appreciating it once I was in L.A. and the Dalai Lama was giving one of the Dalai Lama was giving one of those, public teachings. And you can see in the front rows there were many actors, like well-known actors. And I was like, I thought, oh, maybe I don't know if anybody else does this, but the Dalai Lama, I was like, I wonder if anybody else says this, because the Dalai Lama was like saying stuff. His Dalai Lama was sort of teaching, and he started saying, and like if you're famous and rich, who cares? He's like, it's completely irrelevant. He goes, and then he started teasing. He was like, even he said like, I'm a monk, I don't wear anything. But he's like, even if you're a layperson, you only have 10 fingers, and how many rings are you going to wear? He's like, it's silly, and he started like saying it's like completely silly and meaningless. And I was like trying to look like, oh, well, after like everybody looked upset. But he was Dalai Lama was saying the same thing to Buddha. He was giving the same message the Buddha gives, right? Like all of that is not of any significance at all. We'll leave that soft. But okay, so and what this is saying actually, so the last point though is right. So it's an important point that they say actually that a Buddha doesn't like it's spontaneous. It says here spontaneous and effortless or uninterrupted. It's an important point. In other words, what they say is that a Buddha's activities don't require conscious effort anymore. It's a natural. They're just like a natural expression of who the Buddha is. So the Buddha doesn't have to think, oh, I should go help people, or oh, I kind of want to go help people. That it just happens naturally and spontaneously and effortlessly. So now it has two supplementary points. It says. One, Lama Tsongkhapa quotes Geshe Potawa, who was one of the he was one of the Kanapa Geshis, I think a student of John Lompa. But he says, if you keep contemplating again and again, the firmer your conviction and the purer your mental continuum becomes, the more blessings will arise. Since you gain certain knowledge in this regard, you will take refuge from the bottom of your heart, and then if you merely train in the trainings, everything you do will become an instance of practicing the Buddha's teaching. Right? And so, so what Lama Tsongkhapa and Geshe Potawa here are saying is, real refuge practice isn't just saying the words, right? Like, in other words, because like sometimes people even do like, there's a practice where people do like 100,000 recitations of refuge or something. And it's interesting, Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't say, so say the verses 1,000 times, 100,000 times, or a million, right? That's not what Lama Tsongkhapa says. What Lama Tsongkhapa says is contemplate the meaning, right? Or is contemplate these things. So really what he's saying is contemplate, what is a Buddha? Right? Who is the Buddha? Why am I taking refuge in the Buddha? In other words, like how does a Buddha, who's the Buddha in compared to the other beings I've met, right? And like, why would I want to take refuge in the Buddha? And what's the nature of a Buddha? And can I imagine? And earlier we said if such a being exists, like, so can I imagine that there is such a being as a Buddha? Do I believe that? I think actually many people who are Buddhists either haven't studied, so they don't know what a Buddha is, or they wouldn't really believe that. They would say, oh, well, Buddha was a good person or something, which a Buddha was a good person, but this is saying. Is a different description, right? There is the level of compassion and wisdom here is a different thing than just being a good person. So I'm just saying, like what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is, by contemplating those things, you'll develop faith. And then he says blessings, right? So he's saying is, if you contemplate the qualities of a Buddha, right, and if you gain some conviction, then you'll develop faith, right? He says, and based on your faith, blessings will arise. And in this sense, I want to say something. Like again, I think blessings are an important point. It's not. This is just my own opinion. I don't think blessings are something particularly like magical or something. Like I think it's like let's say this. Like if you. Like I'm just saying, even like, whatever your career is, right? If you've worked, right? Like in other words, like you learn it from somebody, right? And like if that person is wonderful and is great at what they do and is inspiring, right? And you sort of develop a relationship with them and you start to like emulate them, right? Then you become a little bit more like them. Does that make sense? On the other hand, like if you enter a career and your first boss is terrible, like and is what's the word, like not good at what they do and doesn't really care, and you get into a place where nobody cares, right? You might not be the best. Like you don't have good role models in a sense. But like the point is, if you develop a relationship to somebody who's inspiring, you take on some of their qualities over time, right? And the more you relate to them, the more that's true. I think that's what this is saying, right? Like that's true at anything, in any endeavor. Does that make sense? Like, you know, even if you become close friends with somebody, right? Like over time, if you're really close friends with somebody and like you go on vacations with them, and you see them all the time, like you start to take on some of their ways of speaking. You know, if you notice that, or like, you know, you'll start to like pick up a phrase. Even if you notice like a gesture you do is a little bit like them, or if you spend enough time with the person, right? So what this is saying is blessing, I think, is like that. But it's with the Buddha, right? So as if you start to develop a closer and closer relationship to the Buddha, then you start to take on some of the Buddha's qualities, right? You get inspired. You follow the example. You just naturally sort of start to emulate and sort of internalize those qualities, right? So I think blessings is like that. Does that make sense? Because sometimes they talk about your guru and they say, oh, you receive the blessings of your guru. But again, I don't think it's, maybe in some cases it happens, but at least in my experience, it's not that the Buddha or the guru like sort of shoots light rays at you that like, hit you in the head and then you fall over, you know. Like, I think it's that, you know, if you see your guru repeatedly being patient when others harm them, and you like say, wow, that's beautiful, right? And then like you start to feel a little bit like, you know, maybe you can't do it at their level, but then like somebody does some small thing and you think, all right, I can do with that. You know, I think that's the blessings of your guru. Does that make sense? Like, you know, or like with the Buddha, right? You know, the Buddha is ordinarily pictured in meditation, right? And so like if you develop like, you know, if you're like always looking at the Buddha and thinking of the Buddha, you know, then like ordinarily you're like, whatever, like laying around, but then you say, oh wait, I want to go meditate, right? I want to sit like the Buddha. You know? And you start to sit and meditate more, you know, or something like you feel inspired to practice is the point, right? And then if you're contemplating all these qualities, you say, wow, the Buddha has like spontaneous activity to benefit others, and they always benefit others. And then you start to feel, well, I can't do that yet, but I could do like a little more than I did yesterday. You know, today I could do a little more for others. I could emulate the Buddha in that way, and I could feel inspired by the Buddha. And then like you're a little more kind to others, right? So to me, when it says blessings, I just want to say, I think that's, just as my own opinion, I think that's what that means, is that you get inspired and you start to internalize those things, right? But that doesn't happen if you don't develop this quality of contemplating what is a Buddha and understanding and imagining. Because we have to, it's partly contemplation, but it's partly imagination, right? Can you imagine somebody who is always compassionate? Can you imagine somebody who doesn't get attached to anything, or doesn't grasp at anything? You know, can you imagine somebody who is infinitely wise, right? And if you imagine that, then you might feel, okay, well, again, I'm not going to be infinitely wise anytime soon, but I could maybe study a little more and get a little more wise. You know, like you start to feel a little inspiration, like I can take a step in that direction today. And what the Lamas often point out is, if you do that, if you do enough of those little steps, then eventually you can look back and say, oh wow, I never thought I would be here, but I'm here. You know what I mean? Because it's not like it doesn't happen like poof or something, right? It's like you get inspired to be a little more patient, or a little more wise, or a little more studious, or a little more patient. You know, and if you keep doing that through that inspiration, then after a number of years, you can say, oh wow, I've made some progress, good. Then there comes, oh good, we have time. Then there comes a section which I really like. He talks about not gaining conviction. That's the outline point. But he says here, we, now Lama Tsongkhapa, this is Lama Tsongkhapa talking to us, right? He says, we do not value the Buddha's exalted knowledge even as much as we would a keen female fortune teller. And then he says, right, he says, if a keen female fortune teller were to tell you, I know there will be bad luck for you this year, there will be no bad luck, then you'd be happy, right? What he's saying is like, what he's getting at it, I mean, maybe we don't go to fortune tellers, but actually, you can imagine that. We might. I mean, I don't know. Like, in other words, if somebody were to like do a tarot reading for you, right, and were to say, oh, something terrible is going to happen, like you might be a little freaked out. That's what he's getting at, right? Whereas if they were to say, oh, you're gonna like, you're gonna get, you're gonna have a big windfall this year, you might feel, oh shoot, like, good. Or even like, what's the way to say this? Like, so he's giving an analogy there, but like, I don't know if that's as real in our culture, but the point he's getting at is like, we value, what's the way to say this? Like, the wrong things, right? And what he's saying is, we don't follow the Buddha's advice, right? Maybe a better analogy, I don't know if you guys go to fortune tellers, but
Stock market.
the stock market prediction,
that's a good
or the, I'm trying to think of what this is, like, there are many examples like that, right?
Casinos?
The casino, or even also like health advice, right? Like, oh, cut
Yeah.
back on high fat or low fat or whatever those things are. I don't know, all these different things. And what he's saying here, what he's getting at really, though, if you read this section, is, we follow all kinds of advice in our life, right? Our parents told us things, our boss told us things, like, stock market predictors told us things, investment advisors and career advisors and all that. And then what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is he says, and then the advice of the Buddha is not hard to access, right? In other words, the Buddha gave very clear advice. It's in the teachings, right? And then he's saying, what do we do though? And he says here, we say, due to the place and the time that would be inconvenient, basically what we do is we think, well, first of all, we don't feel it deeply, right? Like, whereas if somebody, I'm trying to get it out, like, it's like, what's the way to say this? Like, so the Buddha's advice is very clear, right? But I guess the point is that we easily sort of feel, the Buddha said that, but it's not convenient right now. I'll do that some other time, right? And if you look at how you live your daily life, right, you check for yourself, what are your main activities, right? And what do you mostly focus your mind on? And is that mostly what the Buddha advised, or is it mostly something else, right? And what he's saying is, if you have deep conviction and deep refuge, then most of your life will be spent practicing those teachings, compassion, for example, training your mind in compassion, training your mind in the understanding of emptiness, training your mind in the long rim, all these points, right? And so he's saying, like, so actually you check for yourself, like how, or if you think of 24 hours, right? How much of the time is our mind? You check for yourself. I don't know for you guys, but if you check for yourself, so okay, how much of my time is spent trying to cultivate the realizations of the path to enlightenment, and how much of my time is my mind on other topics? And what he's saying is, if it's like, if your answer is, like 5%, right? But 95% is on other things, 5% is on that, then he's saying, like, then that's not so good, right? Like, that means you haven't really taken refuge very deeply. Maybe you've taken refuge in some sense, but not very deeply, right? If it's 10%, like, that's not very, whereas then you haven't gained much conviction yet, right? And what's important here is Lama Tsongkhapa is not trying to moralize at you, right? He's not saying, so you're bad and you should do this and that. What he's saying is, then you haven't created the cause. Like, whereas of course it's not going to happen, right? Unless you contemplate the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, like, because what we think of is the qualities of other things, actually, right? Like, whereas what we do is motivated by that we have some faith, right? Like, so if you have faith if your faith is in money, right, then you spend time looking at the stock market or looking at your job, like focusing on, not that you can't work, but most of your mental energy will be caught up in work and or investment or whatever. If you think the cause of happiness is, friends, right, then you're going to focus your mental energy on that. If you think the cause of happiness is a romantic partner, then you'll focus your mental energy on that. Whatever you have faith in, right, is where your mental energy, faith in this sense means, I believe this will make me happy, right? So then of course your mind goes towards that. Does that make sense? And so what this is saying is, like, it's going back to that earlier point. What do you take refuge in, right? So like, so in other words, so you have to check. Like, so if you would say, well, 95% of my faith is in relationship, money, status, like stuff, or leisure activities or vacations or whatever that would be. It depends on the person, right? Well, then that's what my mental energy mostly goes towards, right? And what he's saying is somebody who's the more deeply, and what does he say? In your heart, right? He talks about from the depths of your heart taking refuge, right? He's saying that the more deeply that's what's in the depths of your heart, because you've contemplated the qualities of that, then the more that's what will fill your mind and fill your heart. Does that make sense? Day and night. And one more point I'll make, because he gets at this, is, we often say, like, another question, a way of getting at this point is to ask yourself, what am I too busy for? Right? Like, and because actually what you're too busy for is what you don't prioritize. Right? Like, we all do something with our life, right? From this moment until the moment we die, you're doing something, whatever that is. And what you're doing is what you prioritize, right? And the other things in life are the things you're too busy for. Right? Like, so the things you're too busy for are the things that aren't important to you, right? And again, it's not like a criticism here, it's just a point of contemplation. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, what are the things I prioritize? Because they're the things I actually spend my mental and physical energy on. And what are the things that I don't really prioritize, right? Because, like, again, like, that's a way of seeing, well, what do I really value in my heart? Does that make sense? It's like a checking for yourself. Because you might say, a lot of times, like, if you're Buddhist, sometimes people say, oh, yeah, of course, I deeply value the Buddhism, the practice, and, but then, like, if you check, well, how much of my time am I spending following the advice of the Buddha, and how much of my time am I spending following the advice of other sources of information? So anyway, these are just contemplations. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So, so if I understand correctly, so Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, like, because we haven't gained conviction by knowing the Buddha's qualities, that kind of we are not taking refuge. It's kind of superficial a little bit.
Yeah, it's superficial.
Dr. Lauren, I have a question about this fortune teller and obviously astrology and stuff like that. What's the view of Buddhist opinion on, being able to, since we can see past, present, and future, we explicitly told that we shouldn't even think about it as Buddhists, right? What's the position, like actual position? Because some places I've seen them being practiced in a sense, like, say for the reincarnation part, where we want to know east, west, where, this, that, we do some sort of calculation. And for the fact we know that it's true and it's a knowledge and we can practice it. So what's a definitive position from Buddhist perspective?
It's interesting. I think there are a couple different answers. Like, one is, you have to differentiate something. Like, one is that, I was mentioning, like, the bodhisattva levels and so on. Like, there are certain qualities that bodhisattvas gain on high levels of the path that are said to, like, one example I'll give is, like, it's said that bodhisattvas who have achieved a high level of the path can see where beings who die, where they're reborn, for example. And they say that bodhisattvas on a high level of the path cultivate that awareness for a couple reasons. One is, if they have a student who they've been guiding along the path who dies, they want to be able to see, where can I go find them to help them again. So that's a different issue right there. That's the benefit others. Or another is, like, they can see, like, so there are stories, and many stories in Buddhism about where, like, bodhisattvas will see also, like, so their teacher passed away, right? And they can see, oh, my teacher took rebirth here, let me go find them to again relate to them, and something like that. And His Holiness Dalai Lama often does that, right, where he'll find the reincarnations of his teachers and other students of his and so on. So that's said to be one of the activities of a bodhisattva. So that's a different issue. That's a whole different category. And that's actually described in Maitreya's text, that high-level bodhisattvas are supposed to do that. That's one of their activities. So that's completely different. But then, like, this whole idea of, like, astrology and of Buddhism doesn't, let's just say it, like, Buddhism, in my view, just as my own impression, is that Tibetan Buddhism seems to have an ambivalent relationship to those arts or something like that, or like things like those kind of things. Because if you read the actual Tibetan, if you look at the Tibetan tradition as it's practiced and you read the text, what you see is, on the one hand, there's a kind of as Lama Tsongkhapa is doing here, a certain amount of devaluing of that, like saying if you want to become enlightened, don't spend your time on astrology and on fortune telling. That's not what's important. What's important is understanding the Buddha's teachings and practicing them. So for the most part, that's what the focus is. But then for sure, within Tibetan culture, there's a certain aspect of like, if two people are getting married, they oftentimes will check people's charts and so on. So, and some lamas will study that, So there seems to be a somewhat ambivalent relationship, and that is considered one of the secular sciences or something, like those things like poetry and poetics and astrology and those kinds of things are listed in like the sort of secular activities or something like that. But I guess they would consider that, my view, I guess, is that they would consider that similar to something like, actually it's listed in the same area as, for example, woodworking. So in other words, like, a woodworker is a secular activity. You might make somebody's dining room cabinet, or you might make somebody's altar, and that's your job. But it's not, and if you're a bodhisattva and you're doing it to benefit others, okay, but it's not like considered a sacred thing. It's sort of, it can be used for sacred purposes or for ordinary purposes, but it's considered like kind of like that, like a, if you're a good woodworker or if you're a good astrologer, they would sort of consider that similar.
Maybe he's saying that just your average fortune teller is not qualified to predict the
right.
future.
Oh, in this case, clearly, yeah.
She hasn't trained in wisdom practices, so she'd probably give bad advice, maybe.
Yeah, and clearly what Lama Tsongkhapa is really saying, right, is that any worldly source of information, which this is, can't be compared to the qualities of the Buddha, right? And so if you're really Buddhist, then your main practice should be relying upon the advice and the guidance of the Buddha in terms of how you live your life and how you practice and how you train yourself. And so you get the point there. Really, I think this whole verse, I think, is quite important in terms of like, he says here, if you turn your mind inward and investigate this in detail, rather than being unquestionably happy, befuddled by mere words, it will strike you as very true. So what he's saying is, what he's saying here is look at yourselves. He's saying introspect and ask yourself, how much of my heart am I taking refuge in the Buddha? How deeply am I focusing on practicing the Buddha's advice or not? And sort of check for ourselves. And if we find I'm not practicing that deeply, then go back to contemplating, well, what is the Buddha and why should I take refuge? And really go back to those points and contemplate them more. And I mentioned at the very beginning, I think this gets at the point, Khyentse Rinpoche, I mentioned Khyentse Rinpoche said, there were sometimes, he gave some examples of like people who seemed to be very high practitioners who said, I want to go do a retreat on refuge, and like, you can see it even among people, like Western practitioners, or something like people around, like somebody might say, people in America, like somebody might say, oh, that's like, right, doing a retreat on emptiness or on Mahamudra or on something that has like a, like, so in other words, like actually, if you, like, for example, if somebody said, oh, I'm going to your retreat on, actually it would happen sometimes. So if a person said, I'm going to a retreat on Mahamudra or on Dzogchen or on Vajrayana or something like that, and then somebody else said, I'm going to do a retreat on refuge, right? Somebody might think, oh, that person's doing refuge is a beginner. And what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is, no, that's not correct. Right? Like, in other words, refuge is a very important practice and a very advanced practice in a way. And that you can do a retreat on refuge at all different levels, right? That bodhisattvas on the bhumis actually would do, they would contemplate the qualities of Buddha and they would understand them in a different way than we can. So if I were to feel, oh, that's a beginner's practice, but then bodhisattvas who are on like high levels of experience are doing it, then there's something confused about my understanding. And he's saying that the key to refuge is contemplation, is really being honest with ourselves about what's in my heart, and then also contemplating what is a Buddha, what is a Dharma, what is a Sangha, and so on. And lastly, so then he says, therefore, think about the Buddha's positive qualities again and again. Strive to achieve as much certainty in them as possible. If it develops, you will have reached the main point of taking refuge, because a similar certainty will come concerning the Dharma and the Sangha. Without it, there is no way that taking refuge or taming the mind, of taking refuge and taming your mind, they won't occur, right? That's what he's saying. Right? So, I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa is giving us heartfelt advice here. So I just want to emphasize this point, right? And he's saying, if you contemplate these things deeply in terms of the Buddha, it'll be easier to take refuge in the Dharma and the Sangha. But that's his point. Does that make sense? And do you really get the feeling there? I mean, it really feels to me like he's giving advice from his own heart. Right? He's telling you, this is how to practice. This is how I practiced. This is how the previous masters practiced. Here's my advice to you for refuge practice. Really spend time thinking about who is the Buddha, what are the Buddha's qualities, right? Think again and again, right, about the Buddha's positive qualities. You know, and I'll just say one last thing about, like, I'm going back to what I said at the very beginning of refuge practice. Like, actually, like, I was going to say this, like, you know, if you really listen to people, like, I'm thinking of even like adults, but even children, right? Like whereas like, you know, like I can think of like, I'll show you that. I was like somebody who really likes basketball sneakers, right? They can tell you like unbelievably the qualities, right? Of like, what's the difference between like, what's it called, like the ones like Jordans versus what's his name, LeBron sneakers versus like, and like what's that? Kobe sneaker, right? And like the style, the colors, the kind of like they're bouncier, they're whatever, right? And then like somebody who really likes smartphones, right? Like they can tell you so many details, right, about like the qualities of a smartphone, right? Like, and like, you know, where like, and like if you listen to them enough, you get convinced actually, right? Like, so somebody's like a huge fan of iPhone or of whatever, like Android or something, right? Like, and if you listen to them, eventually you become, or like even with like laptops, right? Like that happened to me recently, like where not a few years ago, like where somebody was talking about the qualities of like one kind of computer versus another, and they were like so enthusiastic, and like I don't know much about it. And they were like, oh, to do this and do that, like, there's so many advantages to it. And like if you listen enough, you can become convinced, like, oh wow, like I made a mistake by this. I don't know, I should have bought that kind. That's like really better because look at all the good qualities of it, right? Like, whatever it's got, like, you know, I don't know what they are, but like they could list them, right? And like, people do that about whatever they really are passionate about, don't they? Like they can list all the good qualities of that thing, right? And actually, like, it's like that's what advertisers do. That's also like if you read love poems, right? That's what love poetry is, isn't it? Like, oh, her eyes are like this, or whatever, you know, like whatever, you know. Like there's all these lists of good qualities, you know, and the person like deeply engages with the good qualities of whatever it is that they think is the most wonderful thing, right? Because that's how our minds are, right? Like, and so what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is not something. Again, it's like not something that mysterious. He's saying, so if somebody says to you, what are the good qualities of a Buddha, and if you know more about the good qualities of your car than you do about the good or your whatever it is, or your like crock pot, or your you know new microwave, or like what do they call, what are those things called?
TVs.
Which TV to get?
Blue,
smart TV versus
Blu-ray,
or your whatever I don't know, whatever it would be. Like if you know more about that than you do about the Buddha, it's not a criticism, but it's like, well then, I mean, I don't know. Then you're then maybe we can say you're an iPadist, or you're I don't know, a crockpotist, or you know, like, or it's like it's what do you take refuge in a sense. Like it's funny, I don't know, but whatever. Toyotist or something, I don't know, whatever the thing would be. Like whatever you feel really like, oh, that's so great, and there are all these good qualities to it, and here are what the good qualities are. And like, if we're a Buddhist, right, then what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying in a sense is, then this, you know, we should be at least be as excited about the Buddha as somebody is about basketball sneakers, right? Like, or their new, or the iPhone 6 or something, like, whatever that would be. I don't know, like 6 or 7. But you see what I'm getting at there? Like, it's what do you think about the good qualities of, where you'd be like, oh wow, like it's like this and it's like that, and like you'd be all excited about like, it's amazing how many good qualities there are. Like, oh, I want to, and then if you do that, right, then you want to take refuge, and also you want to become that, right? Like, then you get inspired. Otherwise, if it's like the Buddha is like a statue that's on an altar, and oh, it's somebody who lived, like if it's just like, oh yeah, the Buddha was somebody who lived 2,600 years ago, and I saw a statue of him, it's pretty, or something, like, you know, that's okay, but that's not, let's say it, like, it's not inspiring, you know, and then what you'll wind up with is the new iPhone and not Buddha, you know, or something.
Probably it's talking about one of the parameters of the six, which would be joyous effort or effortless engagement, right? That's what we see in His Holiness whenever he talks about Buddha. It's at a different level altogether, or even some Rinpoches.
Mhm.
It's sublime.
It's interesting because in Tibetan Buddhism you have a lot of statues, but other Buddhist traditions there's not even a picture of the Buddha anywhere to be found. So I guess I'm wondering, do those other types of Buddhism meditate on his qualities much?
Yeah, I wonder, I'm not sure.
You're talking about Hinayana, the other.
Probably like Zen, some of the Japanese forms, like they have a scroll on the wall, that's it, or a circle, like in Zen, there's no Buddha anywhere.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I've studied Zen a little, but I don't know if they contemplate this or not, to be honest. I'm not sure, but it's a good question.
But if you look at the fundamentals of different classes, there are two basic branches. One is Hinayana and one is Mahayana. As far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Long.
No, that's good.
Zen is something that came long after.
Well, it's Mahayana too.
It's Mahayana.
Yeah, it's a Mahayana sub-school. It's a school of but for sure, like if you think of in the southern, you know, many of the Buddhist traditions in the southern parts of Asia that practice the individual liberation vehicles. I mean, they do contemplate the qualities. For sure. They have texts that list some of these qualities, and they study those things. So certainly in those traditions, they do. There is tradition at least like this. I don't know some of the traditions. I'm not sure, but I know there are.
I think there's a lot of focus on desire on the Zen side, but I'm not sure about
Emptiness.
Bodhisattva. Is that a part?
Yeah, they have a tradition of a bodhisattva vow. They do.
They have.
Yeah. I don't know if it's identical, but they do talk about bodhisattvas and bodhisattva vow.
But when you mentioned before, the practice of Hinayana is also something that we should do for the Mahayana.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, for sure, definitely, yeah, for sure. You know, that's why we say, like in the Lam Rim, they talk about it in common with. In other words, there are certain practices, like so. It's like you know, that I used that analogy one time that, like in other words, actually, according to Lam Rim, which is what we're studying, we have to practice those in common. And the analogy sometimes that I was giving when they talk about traveling in common with, is like you know, so like if two people are going, like if let's say if I and a friend are going to travel together, and my friend wants to go to Chicago and I want to go to San Francisco, so we might drive together to Chicago. Then my friend would, you know, say, okay, I'm staying here. I'm going to go on to San Francisco, and I would go on the rest of the way. So in other words, the first part of that path is together, and then the second part is uncommon in the sense that, you know, we parted ways at that point because the person wanted to stay there. But so it's like that in the sense that but you can't go, you have to go at least as far west as Chicago in order to get, you can't say, I'm not going to go as far west as Chicago, I just want to immediately be in San Francisco. It's not possible, right? Whether you're flying or driving, you're going to pass over that level of west. So it's like that. You have to go that part. Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Hinayana, they say to be an arat is enough, right? This idea of a bodhisattva, they don't really have it.
But one thing in that tradition, they do accept that there are bodhisattvas, because, for example, they would accept that the Buddha was a bodhisattva. You know, like, so it's not that they don't accept the existence of bodhisattvas, they do, but there's not, in general, the practitioner who, I mean, you can't, it's hard to judge anyone, to know what any one person is. You know, a person could be culturally in that tradition, but actually a bodhisattva. Also, it's possible, but a person who's actually practicing, let's say, in that way, they would just feel kind of like that's beyond me. Like I just have to achieve my own liberation. So yeah, they wouldn't have the. So it's not that they wouldn't believe there were bodhisattvas, but they would feel that practice is beyond my scope of mind, or that's more than I can
That's not the goal.
It's not my goal. My goal is to achieve my own liberation. Yeah. And you know, sometimes you meet people like that, or it's just like the person just feels that's not my aspiration.
Or maybe they think it automatically happens, like after you become personally enlightened, then suddenly you have a desire to help others to come back.
And most of the time, I mean, both in the scriptures and in the descriptions, and even like when you read about it, but also the people I've known who kind of have that more, I don't know, who are more focused on that level of practice. It's more it's not. I think more. It's like the feeling isn't like a lack of caring, or is it's a feeling of love and kindness to others, but a feeling of like I wouldn't delay my own. Like the feeling on the person's side is more like, you know, I care about others, but not that much. Like not where I'm going to delay my own well-being, or not where I would sort of like have to go through more in order to do it. It's just like the person wouldn't feel that sense of inspired to do that or something.
It would be something like Sravaka's level in Mahayana that we talked about.
Yeah, that's what she thought. Shravaka or you know, aspiring to an arhat, same thing. So it'd be it's more the person's motivation. In other words, that's the idea. Is that the person's motivation? They say that the person's motivation it's not that they don't have love actually, but it's like they don't have that attitude of like it's my responsibility. Others' welfare is my that there's and you could you know one can imagine that, right? Like there's a feeling of like it doesn't feel like the person feels, well, that's not, the person just feels in their heart, that's not my responsibility. Whereas the bodhisattva feels in their heart, it is my responsibility, and that's what I would want to do, and like the purpose of my existence is that, and I would happily, you know, sort of delay my own liberation if I can be of benefit to others, and so on. You know, like so, and that actually others are numberless, so actually their well-being is more important than just mine in that sense. You know, like because not that any one person is more valuable than another, but this feeling of others are numberless, I'm just one. If I can be of benefit to all other beings, that's much more beneficial. That's my main motivation in that sense. So it's a difference of, it's more a difference of inner motivation than
Actually,
oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so, but from a practical standpoint, the Bodhisattva, who says, so I understand like there's many, you know, steps to a certain, you know, to get there. Who says that one is now a Bodhisattva? Is that because I know there's vows and, you know, in the Buddhist tradition. So is that tied to the vows and then getting to the level so that now you know you're at a certain level?
That's a good question. There are two different things which are worth thinking about to answer your question. You know, one is, actually I want to differentiate three different things a person can do, like, or that can happen. So one is, first of all, there are two different sets of vows in terms of the bodhisattva question. One is the aspiring bodhisattva vow. Right, so that's where the person, His Lama often says, at that level, like the practitioner has an extremely deep appreciation for bodhicitta. Right? So the person sort of says, I would like to realize bodhicitta. I would like to be of service to others. I would like to become a Buddha to benefit others. That's my aspiration. And I'm sort of, I want to take a vow in front of the Buddhas or in front of my teacher. Like, as long as the Lama often gives that set of vows, or other Lamas give them. You know, and so in that case, the person, that's the first kind of vow, is the aspiring bodhisattva vow. And that there are certain basic commitments to. But the core of that one is sort of aspiring to develop bodhicitta and to eventually practice. Then there's a second set of vows that are different. They're related, but a different thing, which they usually translate engaging bodhisattva vow. And so that's the next step. There are more vows involved in that. So that's where the person feels they've already taken. Actually, you're supposed to take the aspiring first. It could be all in one ceremony, or it could be separate. There's a tradition where you can do one and then wait as long as you want to do the other, or sometimes people do them at the same time. But it should be sequential. So the engaging bodhisattva vow is where the person essentially says, it's more than just an aspiration. I want to now begin practicing the 6 perfections. we mentioned earlier, right? Yeah, generosity, patience, generosity, ethics, patience, joyful effort, concentration, wisdom, and I want to actively every day be engaging and cultivating bodhicitta and try to do the practices of a bodhisattva. Right? So in that sense, it's engaging in the sense that it's more than an aspiration. It's the person's committing to engaging in those practices as an essential part of their life, really. So that's a different level of, a different set of bodhisattva vows, in a sense. Right? And if the person takes those, there are many guidelines and commitments, that are sort of listed, like, things like, if you say I'm a bodhisattva, I'll give an example. Like if you say I've taken the engaging bodhisattva vow, I'm going to engage in these practices, and then there's one example is, and then if somebody's really sick and desperately in need, well, you don't blow them off. In other words, if you can help them, if you're capable of helping them, you show up and you try to be helpful. Right? And it would say like, so there are guidelines like that where it says, if you've taken that and then somebody says, oh, I'm really sick and I need help, and you say, whatever, like, I'm going to a show tonight and I don't have time for you, and like you blow them off, that's not in the spirit of the vow you took. And so there are many examples like that. But in brief, so there's the engaging bodhisattva vow where you say, I'm going to do my best. You're not, obviously, we're not, when you take that vow, it's not that you're some advanced person on those grounds, but you're saying, I'm going to begin now to actually do the practice of a bodhisattva as best I can each day. Then I want to differentiate, to answer your question, there's a third thing that's not a vow, it's a different issue, which is, and we'll get into that in the section in bodhicitta in here in more detail, but there's a different thing that happens too, which is, then there are the practices, there are two methods for cultivating bodhicitta, which actually Lama Tsongkhapa teaches in the text, so I won't go into now, but they'll come. And so then there comes a point where the person, let's say, is engaging in these practices of cultivating bodhicitta through one or both of those methods. And they're engaging in that intensively over an extended period of time. Lama Tsongkhapa says there comes a point where the person realizes bodhicitta. They actually have the experience of bodhicitta. Lama Tsongkhapa says, as Khenpo Rinpoche points out, I'll give a point about that, which is, at first, there comes what they call, sometimes we call it effortful bodhicitta, or sometimes we call it kind of like artificial bodhicitta, which is not artificial in a negative sense. It's artificial in the sense that it's like, it's not yet the genuine thing, but nobody gets to the genuine thing without it. So it's like, it's sort of created, it's sort of contrived, that's the word, contrived bodhicitta, where the person has to put a lot of effort in to develop a little bit of it, and then they put a lot of effort in to develop more of it. And it's still contrived in the sense that it's still sort of, through the person contemplating and trying, they sort of develop this experience, but it's not yet the full-blown genuine thing. But as the person becomes more and more familiar with that, it becomes more intense, right? And then there comes a point where you could sometimes say they realize bodhicitta, or they actualize bodhicitta. So at that point, it's no longer contrived. In other words, it's the person's natural way of being, like so that when they wake up in the morning, when they go to sleep at night, even in their dreams, that's their sort of baseline, normal state of motivation. So when the person reaches that level of practice, then they've actually become a bodhisattva. Because whereas the definition of somebody who is a bodhisattva really is the person who's realized bodhicitta. So in one way, you could say, like many times, for example, the person could take the aspiring bodhisattva vow and the engaging bodhisattva vow before they're actually a bodhisattva, right? But they're sort of taking that as a way of saying, I'm engaging in this practice, and they do the meditation on bodhicitta and keep doing, they get closer and closer until they realize bodhicitta and they become a bodhisattva. Other times there are people who maybe took, you could imagine where somebody would take the aspiring bodhisattva vow, realize bodhicitta, and then take the engaging. So different practitioners might do it in a different order. That's up to them. But those are three different important events in terms of the relationship to the bodhisattva path. Does that answer your question? Yeah, and that's really, you get that idea also. I'm just going to say that the idea of contrived and then uncontrived, because that's important. Sometimes people think contrived is bad. Especially contrived is a better word. I like that word, contrived. But in other words, that we can only with something like bodhicitta or refuge, even, right? Whereas at first it takes effort, right? So in other words, you could take that same point about, I just want to say about contrived and uncontrived. You could get the same thing about refuge, right? At the beginning, the person might have to think a lot. Okay, what's a Buddha? you know, I want to take refuge in the Buddha, I want to practice well. It's like, it takes a lot of effort. And then if the person does that enough, and as Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, if the person contemplates for years, you know, who a Buddha is, and, you know, sort of the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dharma, the qualities of Sangha, then eventually there comes an uncontrived version of refuge, right? Where the person naturally in their heart, when something happens, good or bad, they think of the Buddha, right? And they sort of, that's their first
It's
thought.
like spontaneous,
Spontaneous and
without effort.
without
Right.
effort, but that only comes through effort. You know, it's like, but
With effort.
effortless only comes through effort.
Right? Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's the same as the Buddha, right? The Buddha's activities are effortless, right? But it only became effortless because the Buddha practiced for 3 countless great eons to become somebody who could do effortless. It's funny.
So sometimes we can I don't know if it's contrived. I mean, it's actually for sure it's contrived, but sometimes you get good days where you feel like you get in a hold of, like, you know, like good bodhicitta or something like that, and you feel like, oh, I think I'm getting a handle of it a little bit, maybe, I don't know, right? So, but then it's like it escapes. So how do you go from like holding it, the bodhicitta, so as you maintain your bodhicitta? Is that through like more contemplation, or just continue? So how do you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes it comes easy, but then other times it's like, man, I just can't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Do
is
people
that
know do people get what you're I think, like, a couple things. One is, I was thinking of, in relation to what you're asking, I was thinking of what, one thing that Khenchen Rinpoche pointed out sometimes, which I thought was very helpful, was that, you know, in good times and bad, when you're up, when you're down, like, no matter what, right? Like, cultivating bodhi, he gave the example of 6 times a day. You know, as if a person 6 times, like throughout the day, you know, 6 times a day really engaged in the practice deeply, no matter how they were feeling. So sometimes it might feel very inspiring, other times it's like the person's feeling very selfish because something happened, but they still really try. Like, he was saying, then if you do that for a long period of time, like, you know, months, let's say, right, or years, like, he said, then you'll see some real progress, right? Because it's not just every now and then. It's like applying effort over and over and over. We're just like Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, right? Repeatedly, you know, again and again. Right? So one thing is, like Lama Tsongkhapa and Khenchen Rinpoche saying something, it's like repeated practice no matter what's going on, no matter, like, if you're happy, if you're sad, if things are good, if things are bad, if you're sick, if you're healthy, that you still keep making that effort. They're saying then you make progress. That's one answer. The other answer that strikes me is, like, I sometimes think this way, like, you know how you were given that example where, like, you feel good one day, you feel bad. I was thinking, like, through that making effort over and over and over, it's like, you know, like, I was going to say this. I sometimes think this way. It's like, let's say it, like, that our practice is within a certain range sometimes. You know, like, it goes up and down on a given day, right? Like, you might feel more inspired this day and less. But I think one way I think of the answer to your question is, like, so, like, let's say you start with where your bodhicitta, your range is here, right? Then eventually, I think if you do, like, through the familiarization, your range could be here, right? Like, so, like, eventually you can reach a point where your bad day is as good as one of your better days before, right?
Right.
But it's still not perfect, you know. Then eventually you reach a point where your what's to say it? Like, your worst day is still better than your previous best day because you're making progress. But and then your best day then would be wow compared to before, but
So you're still
not
progressing.
Yeah, so I think really, like, you know, it's like progress in these things like refuge or bodhicitta or it's not. I mean, from a practical point of view, I've never met anybody personally. I've never yet met anyone myself, or I've never met where their practice was just like that. Like, my experience of people is, in reality, is people's practice is like, you know, if you're practice, and the problem is if you don't make continuous effort. Like, I've known some people whose practice is like this. There's like, you know, they start off here, they make a lot of effort, they have some big expectations, it doesn't happen quickly, you know, they don't become enlightened quickly, and they just, well, forget it. Like, that's not good, you know. So the idea is, like, applying slowly more effort. So, I mean, because I think people, so, like, my experience with people is either, I'm saying, sharing real experience of people, like, real people I know. So, like, some people's practice is like that. Where they try really hard for a little while, they expect some big result, and then like, they just give up. And other people whose practice is like this, like where they try a little bit, they reach a certain plateau of like some inner peace or something, and they just keep practicing, but they don't really make that much effort, and they just sort of stay at the same level.
Mm.
You know, maybe like that, but they don't really progress. And then other people, it's through the continuous effort, right, where their practice, again, I've never met anybody that's like this.
Mm.
Maybe there are people, like,
Right.
like Rinpoches or something, but, you know, somebody who's reincarnated, like, but I think most of it is like that, you know what I mean, like, like this, you know, like this thing. And I think that should be our goal, you know, because the goal can't be like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, but it's like if we keep applying effort, you know, then there comes a point, right, where it's like, it really, I think that's the idea, like where, you know, where you start to realize, oh wow, like, my worst day is no longer, you know, my most selfish day is no longer down here, right? Now my most selfish day is here. So even when the worst thing happens, or my anger, right? The Dalai Lama points out, right? He says, like, my anger used to be like this, but now, even when I do still get angry, right? But like, my worst anger is like half as much as what it used to be, or something. You know, like that's progress, right? Like, that's big progress. So I think that's the goal, in a way. It's like, through continuous effort, yeah, like, that like, it's like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
I wish you thought we went over, but, well, so next time we'll pick up with the positive qualities of the Dharma, okay? So that's where we left off. So, the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, am I right? The next